Hi, this is the second segment of Madelyn's Cotillion dress, and I wanted to share with you the construction of the waistband and a couple of tips as we go along. I didn't want to get too far on the waistband without kind of sharing a little bit of the detail of the construction with you. So what you see before you is the front waistband of the Mary Morgan dress, and you see how it starts high in the middle and then tapers down to the waist on each side. This is the back piece, and this is the back piece. You may not see it here. Let me see if I can get a closer shot. I'll bring it into view. I've covered a June Taylor board. That's what I'm working on, and I've got a piece of fabric over it so you can see what we're doing. But the first thing I did was I marked the seam allowance along the top here and the bottom, just using a basic, the air erasable marker. This is a great one, and it works great with silk because it just comes right out and just in time. You don't have to rinse it or anything, and you don't want to have to wash this out because it'll stain the silk. So the air erasable is really great, and I usually find that it stays in for about a day. So work with it. It's easy to work with as you're going along. And I just used a seam gauge and set it at my seam allowance and just marked the top and bottom seam so I'd know exactly what I was working with in here, because in between here has to go the shaped tatting. So what I did next was I shaped the tatting. Let me zoom back out. I shaped the tatting independently. As you can see, I laid that on top of the front waistband. But what I did was I drew this waistband on a piece of paper, and then I wet my tatting and worked with it very damp and shaped it. I shaped the top piece first, putting pins along this top edge, and then putting pins along this bottom edge, because you want to do it on the outer curves of each piece. And then I just put a dry iron on top of it and shaped it. And once it was in place, I starched it with a light spray starch and then shaped it again, which gave it a nice stiff, stable base. The next thing I did was I shaped another layer of lace right down below it. And again, I pinned the upper curve and the outer curve, and I pressed it while it was damp. It's really easy to work with when it's damp. And then spray starched it, and once it was shaped like I wanted it to be, I just used regular clear tape and taped about every inch to hold it together. I took it to the sewing machine and zigzagged the two together using the lace-to-lace technique. So let me see if I can zoom that really close. Now I've got a zigzag stitch right here in the middle, and I just butted the two headers together and zigzagged them together. And the key to that is to use an 80 weight thread, a really, really light thread, and you can't even see where I've joined it. So I'm going to zoom back here. Now what you're going to do is you're going to place this right on top of the waistband piece and pin it on, and you're going to stitch along the header of this edge and the header of this edge, the top and bottom edges, and you'll be using this as a guideline. Don't worry if it's a little bit, if it bites a little bit into the seam allowance, that's okay. What we'll do once this is stitched is we'll use the stitching on the back side as our stitching guide when we stitch it to the bodice. Now I'm going to move on to show you something on the skirt. Here is the center panel, and as you see, we've finished the embroidery on the center panel, of course, before we cut it out. But what I did was, to finish the seams, I simply pinked the edges, because on silk charmeuse that is all that's required. I used this handy rotary cutter that's got this great shape to it. It made it really a lot easier than cutting it with pinking shears, but pinking shears work great too. Then I just open it out and iron it. The reason I chose to do this type of seam finish is because if you do a zigzag seam finish or if you do a French seam finish, you get a bulky seam, and when you press it, you actually mar the fabric and it leaves a permanent line or crease where that bulky seam was. When you pink it, you get a nice flat, smooth seam, and when you iron it, you don't get any indentations on the other side. And this will not unravel, and this is plenty what we need for the inside of this dress. So I wanted to share this seam finishes with you. I'm going to add the waistband to the bodice, and then I will come back and share that with you.